Sometimes life breaks a man so completely that he'll grasp at any thread of hope, no matter how thin. Marcus Sullivan knew that feeling better than most, sitting alone in his empty apartment with nothing but bills he couldn't pay and memories he couldn't forget. The war veteran had lost his family, his home, and nearly his will to keep going. When he found an old Chernobyl train car for sale at $500, he saw it as his last chance. The seller said it was just scrap metal from the disaster zone. Marcus bought it, hoping to make a few dollars selling the parts. But when he opened those rusted doors, what he found inside would change his life forever. What could be hidden in an abandoned train car that would give a broken man everything he thought he'd lost? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning light filtered through the cracked blinds of Marcus Sullivan's studio apartment, illuminating dust motes that danced like ghosts of better times. He sat at his small kitchen table, staring at the stack of overdue notices that had become his daily companions. Electric bill, past due. Rent, final notice. Credit card, account suspended. Each envelope told the same story of a man who had once served his country with honor and now couldn't afford to keep the lights on. Marcus rubbed his temples, feeling the familiar throb of another sleepless night. The nightmares had visited again, flashes of an IED explosion outside Kandahar, the screams of his men, the metallic taste of blood and dust. 3 tours in Afghanistan had left their mark, invisible wounds that no amount of VA therapy seemed to heal. The pills helped sometimes, but they also made everything feel distant and gray, like he was watching his life through frosted glass. His phone buzzed against the table. A text from Jennifer, his ex-wife. Sarah's school play is Thursday at 7. She really wants you there. The message was followed by another. Please don't let her down again. Marcus closed his eyes, remembering the last time he'd disappointed his daughter. The Father's Day picnic where he'd had a panic attack in the middle of the park, surrounded by happy families and the sound of children laughing. Sarah had been 12 then, old enough to understand that something was wrong with Daddy, but too young to grasp why he couldn't just get better. That was 2 years ago. She was 14 now, and the gap between them had only widened. He picked up the framed photo from the table, the only decoration in his sparse apartment. Sarah smiled back at him from her 8th grade graduation, her dark hair catching the light, her eyes bright with possibility. She had Jennifer's smile, but his stubborn chin. In the picture, she wore the necklace he'd given her for her birthday, a simple silver heart that cost more than he could afford, but less than she deserved. The apartment felt smaller every day. After the divorce, he'd sold the house, their house. With the tire swing he'd hung from the old oak tree and the garden where Jennifer had grown tomatoes every summer. The equity had covered Jennifer's lawyer fees and the down payment on her new place across town. Marcus had taken what was left and found this place. 400 square feet of cracked walls and temperamental plumbing in a building that smelled perpetually of cabbage and regret. His disability check covered the basics, barely. The PTSD rating gave him enough to survive, but not enough to live. He'd tried working a security job at a shopping mall, a night shift at a warehouse, but crowds, the noise, the constant vigilance required to function in the world had proven too much. Every unexpected sound sent him reaching for a weapon that wasn't there. Every stranger looked like a potential threat. That's when he'd started looking for alternatives. Get-rich-quick schemes mostly, born of desperation and sustained by hope. He tried flipping furniture from garage sales, selling crafts online, even driving for a delivery service until a backfiring truck sent him into a full panic attack at a red light. Each failure had chipped away at what remained of his confidence, leaving him feeling like a shadow of the man who had once led soldiers through hostile territory. The Craigslist ad had caught his attention 3 days ago. Soviet-era train car. Salvage rights, $500 oboe. Located Pennsylvania rail yard. Cash only. The seller, a man named Eddie Kowalski, claimed it was legitimate scrap from the Chernobyl evacuation, hauled out of Ukraine in the late 80s and abandoned when the company that bought it went bankrupt. The photo showed a massive, rusted hulk covered in Cyrillic lettering, sitting on a forgotten siding like a monument to industrial decay. Marcus had called immediately. His military mind calculated the possibilities. Steel was worth money, especially if you could transport it to the right buyer. The wheels alone might be worth a few hundred. If he could get the car cut up and sold for scrap, he might clear enough to pay his rent for a few months and maybe, just maybe, take Sarah somewhere nice for her birthday. Eddie's voice on the phone had been gravelly, worn down by years of cigarettes and disappointment. "Look, buddy, I'm going to be straight with you. I bought this thing 20 years ago thinking I was going to turn it into some kind of restaurant or something. Tourist attraction, you know? But the damn thing's been sitting there ever since. My wife says it's gotta go, and frankly, I'm tired of looking at it." The rail yard was an hour's drive from Marcus's apartment, located in a forgotten corner of Pennsylvania where industrial dreams went to die. Eddie had given him directions to the Susquehanna Valley Rail Preservation Society, though preservation seemed a generous term for the collection of abandoned rolling stock and rusted machinery that stretched across 20 acres of cracked concrete and weedy gravel. Marcus had scraped together the $500 from his emergency fund money he'd been saving for Sarah's school expenses. It felt like a betrayal, spending his daughter's college money on a gamble. But desperation had a way of rewriting the rules of responsible parenting. The drive through Pennsylvania's autumn landscape should have been peaceful. Rolling hills dressed in gold and crimson, small towns with courthouse squares and Friday night football games. Instead, Marcus found himself gripping the steering wheel, his knuckles wide as he navigated winding roads that reminded him too much of mountain passes. In Afghanistan, every curve might hide an ambush. Every overpass could conceal a sniper. He pulled into the rail yard just before sunset, his ancient Honda Civic looking out of place among the industrial relics. The place felt haunted, filled with the ghosts of America's railway past. Steam engines from the 1940s sat beside diesel locomotives from the 60s, all slowly surrendering to rust and time. Weeds grew between the rails, and the evening air carried the scent of creosote and decay. Eddie Kowalski emerged from a trailer that served as the yard's office, a man in his 70s with oil-stained hands and eyes that had seen too much. He wore coveralls that might have been blue once and a baseball cap advertising a beer that went out of business during the Carter administration. "You must be Sullivan," Eddie said, extending a hand that felt like sandpaper. "Hell of a drive for a piece of junk." "I've made worse trips for less promising deals," Marcus replied, though he wasn't sure that was true. They walked through the yard as the sun painted everything in shades of amber and rust. Eddie pointed out various pieces of rolling stock, a Pullman sleeper car that had once carried passengers between New York and Chicago, a caboose from the Penn Central Railroad, freight cars that had hauled everything from cattle to coal across the American heartland. Most of this stuff came from estate sales and bankruptcy auctions, Eddie explained as they navigated around a pile of railroad ties. People buy them thinking they're going to restore them, turn them into restaurants or bed and breakfasts, or some damn thing. Usually runs out of money about the time they realize how much work it actually takes. The Chernobyl train car sat at the far end of the yard, isolated from the other rolling stock like a quarantined patient. Even in the fading light, Marcus could see why it commanded attention. The car was massive, nearly 90 feet long, and built like a fortress. Soviet engineering had prioritized durability over elegance, and this machine looked like it could survive another nuclear winter. Cyrillic characters painted in faded red, stretched across the side, barely legible beneath layers of rust and weather. Damage. The car sat on heavy steel wheels, each one taller than Marcus, and the undercarriage revealed the kind of robust construction that American railroads had abandoned decades ago in favor of lighter, more efficient designs. "She's a beauty, ain't she?" Eddie said, though his tone suggested he was trying to convince himself as much as Marcus. Built in 1982, according to the paperwork, was supposed to haul freight out of the exclusion zone after the accident. Heavy stuff, contaminated equipment, vehicles, that sort of thing. But the whole operation got shut down before they finished loading her up. Marcus walked around the car, running his hands along the steel sides. The metal felt cold despite the warm evening, and something about the train car's presence seemed to absorb sound. Even the constant chatter of crickets and the distant hum of traffic on Route 11 faded when he stood close to it. "How'd it end up here?" Marcus asked. Eddie shrugged. "Company called Bethlehem Industrial bought a bunch of rolling stock from the Soviets in '89, right after the wall came down. Figured they could retrofit it for American rail systems, sell it to freight companies looking for heavy-duty equipment. But it turned out the gauge was wrong. These things run on wider rails than we use here. Cost more to convert than to build new, so most of it just sat around until the company went belly up." He pulled a heavy key ring from his pocket and approached what looked like a personnel door near the front of the car. Previous owner welded most of the loading doors shut, said he was worried about kids getting inside and hurting themselves. But this one still opens, or used to anyway. Haven't tried it in a few years. The lock was massive, built to Soviet specifications and designed to keep out everything short of a tank. Eddie tried several keys before finding one that fit, then struggled with the mechanism for several minutes before the lock finally surrendered with a grinding clank. "There we go," he said, breathing heavily from the effort. "She's all yours, assuming you still want her." Marcus peered into the darkness beyond the open door. The interior was black as a cave, and a strange smell drifted out, not unpleasant. Exactly, but unfamiliar. Ozone, maybe, or the scent that lingers after lightning strikes. "Got any kind of inventory of what's inside?" Marcus asked. Eddie laughed, a sound like gravel in a cement mixer. "Son, I haven't been inside that thing since I bought it. For all I know, it could be full of gold bars or dead bodies. That's your problem now." They completed the transaction. In Eddie's trailer, Marcus counting out $500 in 20s, while Eddie filled out a bill of sale on a form that looked older than both of them. The paperwork was simple. Marcus now owned one Soviet freight car, serial number 4419 CCP, along with whatever contents might be found therein. "You got a way to haul her out of here?" Eddie asked as he handed over the keys. Marcus hadn't thought that far ahead. "I'll figure something out. Mind if I leave her here for a few days while I arrange transport?" "She's been sitting here for 20 years, Eddie said. "Few more days ain't gonna hurt." As Marcus drove home through the Pennsylvania darkness, he found himself thinking about the train car's smell, that strange ozone scent that seemed to linger in his nostrils. There had been something else too, something his conscious mind had dismissed, but his soldier's instincts had noted. The interior of that car hadn't felt empty. Even in the brief moment he peered inside, there had been a sense of presence, as if something was waiting in the darkness. He told himself it was just imagination, the product of a tired mind and too many sleepless nights. But as he pulled into his apartment complex and climbed the stairs to his empty studio, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that buying that train car had been more than just a desperate gamble. It felt like destiny. Marcus returned to the rail yard. 3 days later, armed with a crowbar, a heavy-duty flashlight, and a thermos of coffee that had gone cold during the drive. The morning mist clung to the abandoned rolling stock like spirits reluctant to leave. and the autumn air carried a bite that reminded him winter wasn't far behind. Eddie's trailer was dark. The old man kept irregular hours and seemed to disappear. For days at a time, Marcus was grateful for the privacy. Whatever he found inside the train car, he wanted to discover it alone, without curious eyes watching his reaction. The Soviet freight car loomed even larger in daylight, its bulk casting a shadow that seemed to swallow sound. Someone had painted a radiation symbol on the side decades ago. The trefoil warning now faded to a ghostly outline beneath layers of rust and weather. Marcus wondered if it was a joke or a genuine warning. With Soviet equipment, it was often hard to tell the difference. He approached the personnel door, fishing Eddie's key ring from his pocket. The lock turned easier this time, as if it remembered him. The heavy door swung open with a groan of protesting metal, and Marcus was again struck by that strange smell ozone and something else, something that made his skin prickle with static. Electricity dot his flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing an interior that defied his expectations. Instead of the empty cargo hold he'd anticipated, the train car had been converted into something resembling a mobile laboratory. Steel shelving lined the walls, and though many of the shelves were empty, others held an eclectic collection of objects that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. Marcus stepped inside, his boots echoing on the metal floor. The air felt thick, almost viscous, and his flashlight beam seemed to bend slightly, as if the darkness itself was refracting the light. He'd experienced something similar in Afghanistan, in the caves where Taliban fighters stored ammunition. The air had felt charged there too, heavy with potential energy dot, but this was different. This felt alive. The first shelf held what appeared to be scientific instruments, devices with Cyrillic labels and purposes Marcus couldn't begin to guess. Geiger counters, from the look of them, though they were built with the kind of over-engineering that characterized Soviet technology. One of them was still clicking softly, its needle dancing across a scale marked in units Marcus didn't recognize. He picked up the device, surprised by its weight. The moment his fingers made contact with the metal casing, the clicking intensified, and the needle swung sharply to the right. Not dangerous levels, his military training told him. He'd been exposed to worse radiation during his tours in Iraq, where depleted uranium rounds were standard issue, but definitely elevated above background. Marcus set the Geiger counter aside and continued his exploration. The next shelf held what looked like personal effects, photographs, letters, small mementos that spoke of lives interrupted. Most of the writing was in Cyrillic, but he could make out dates from 1986, the year of the disaster. These weren't just random objects. They were artifacts from Chernobyl itself, relics of the evacuation that had never made it to their intended destinations. At the back of the car, mounted on a specially designed bracket, sat something that made Marcus's breath catch in his throat. At first glance, it looked like a simple pendant, a crystal roughly the size of his thumb, suspended from a silver chain. But as his flashlight beam struck it, the crystal began to glow with its own inner light, pulsing slowly like a sleeping heartbeat. Marcus approached the pendant carefully, every instinct screaming caution. In Afghanistan, anything that glowed was usually bad news. Phosphorus rounds, chemical weapons, improvised explosive devices rigged with exotic triggers. But this felt different. Instead of danger, the crystal radiated something that felt almost like warmth, like the memory of sunlight on skin. He reached out hesitantly, his fingers barely brushing the crystal's surface. The moment he made contact, the world exploded into sensation. The train car disappeared. Marcus found himself standing in a different place, a different time. Snow fell around him, but it wasn't clean white snow. It was gray, ash-laden, carrying the bitter taste of radiation and fear. Before him loomed the concrete bulk of a nuclear reactor, its core exposed to the sky like a wound in the earth. People moved around him, men in white coats and radiation suits, Workers with faces etched by exhaustion and terror. He could hear them speaking in Russian, their words somehow intelligible despite his lack of the language. They were trying to contain something that couldn't be contained, fighting a battle against physics itself. A man approached through the snow, older than the others, with eyes that held depths of knowledge and sorrow. His white coat was stained with substances Marcus didn't want to identify, and in his hand he carried the same crystal pendant that Marcus now held. "You are not supposed to be here," the man said in accented English, his voice carrying across impossible distances. "Not yet, but perhaps it is time." "Who are you?" Marcus asked, though he wasn't sure if he spoke aloud or merely thought the words. "Dr. Alexei Volkov," the man replied. "And you are the one who will finish what I could not." He held up the pendant, its glow intensifying until it seemed to pulse in rhythm with Marcus's heartbeat. The radiation, it does more than kill. It opens doors, breaks down the barriers between what is and what could be. We thought we could control it, use it to enhance human potential. We were wrong. The vision began to fade, the snow and concrete dissolving like sugar in water. But Volkov's voice followed Marcus back to the present. "The pendant chooses its bearer. Guard it well, and it will guard you in return." Marcus found himself back in the train car, gasping as if he'd been holding his breath underwater. The crystal pendant hung from his fingers, warm against his palm, despite the cold morning air. His hands were shaking, but not from fear, from energy, as if the pendant had charged him like a battery. He looked around the car with new eyes, understanding now that this wasn't just a collection of abandoned relics. These were tools, artifacts, of an experiment that had gone catastrophically wrong but had left behind something unexpected. Something that might be described as magic, if one believed in such things. The Geiger counter was still clicking, but the sound no longer seemed ominous. It was more like a Morse code signal, a rhythm that almost made sense if he listened carefully enough. Marcus hung the pendant around his neck, feeling its weight settle against his chest like an anchor dot as he continued to explore the car's contents. He began to notice changes in himself. The chronic pain in his lower back, a souvenir from an IED blast outside Kandahar, began to fade. The constant tension in his shoulders, the hypervigilance that made him jump at every unexpected sound, started to ease. For the first time in years, Marcus felt truly present in his own body. He discovered more artifacts as the morning progressed, a notebook filled with equations and diagrams that seemed to shift when he wasn't looking directly at them, a collection of small metal objects that hummed with harmonic frequencies, and a series of photographs that showed the same locations at different times, as if someone had been documenting changes that occurred over decades rather than moments. The notebook drew his attention most strongly. Written in a mixture of Russian and English, it appeared to be Dr. Volkov's research journal. The entries detailed experiments in what he called psychic amplification using low-level radiation to enhance human consciousness and perception. The early entries were optimistic, describing subjects who showed increased empathy, enhanced intuition, and the ability to sense emotional states in others. But as Marcus read further, the tone changed. Later entries spoke of subjects who became overwhelmed by their abilities, who could no longer distinguish between their own emotions and those of others. Some had suffered complete psychological breaks. Others had simply disappeared, vanishing without a trace, as if they had stepped out of reality itself. The final entry was dated April 25, 1986, one day before the reactor explosion. Volkov wrote about a breakthrough, a way to stabilize the psychic enhancement process using crystalline matrices grown in the reactor's radiation field. But he also wrote about opposition from his superiors, who wanted to weaponize the research rather than use it for healing. They do not understand, the entry concluded. Power without wisdom is destruction. If they proceed with militarization, we risk more than an accident. We risk tearing holes in the fabric of reality itself. Marcus closed the journal. Pieces of a larger puzzle began to fall into place. The train car hadn't been abandoned. It had been evacuated, its contents saved from a disaster that may have been more than just a reactor meltdown. And somehow, 35 years later, these artifacts had found their way to him. He spent the rest of the day cataloging the train car's contents, making careful notes about each item and its apparent function. Some objects seemed inert, their purpose unclear. Others responded to his touch with varying degrees of intensity. The pendant remained the most active, its glow pulsing stronger whenever he held other artifacts as evening approached. Marcus locked the train car and drove home, the pendant still hanging around his neck beneath his shirt. The drive passed. In a blur of sensations, colors seemed more vivid. Sounds carried layers of meaning he'd never noticed before, and the emotional states of other drivers became almost tangible presences in his awareness. For the first time in years, when Marcus lay down in his narrow bed, sleep came easily. And with it came dreams unlike any he'd experienced before, not the nightmares of war and loss that had haunted him for so long, but visions of possibility, of healing, of connections that transcended the boundaries of ordinary human experience. In his dreams, Dr. Volkov stood at the foot of his bed, no longer wearing the radiation-stained coat of the disaster zone, but dressed in simple civilian clothes, his eyes bright with hope rather than sorrow. "Now the real work begins," he said, and Marcus knew with absolute certainty that his life had changed forever. Marcus woke the next morning feeling more rested than he had in years. The familiar weight of depression that usually settled on his chest each dawn was absent, replaced by a sense of clarity that felt almost foreign. He sat up in bed, automatically reaching for the pendant beneath his shirt, and felt its gentle warmth against his palm. The nightmares hadn't come. For the first time since his return from Afghanistan, he slept through the night without jolting awake in a cold sweat, his heart hammering against his ribs as phantom explosions echoed in his ears. Instead, his dreams had been filled with images of light and possibility, guided by the calm voice of Dr. Volkov, explaining concepts that seemed to hover just beyond the edge of understanding. Marcus made coffee and sat at his small table with Volkov's journal, working through the Russian text with the help of an online translator. The process was slow and frustrating. Technical terms didn't translate well, and some of the handwriting was nearly illegible, but gradually, a clearer picture began to emerge. Dr. Alexei Volkov had been part of a secret Soviet program called Project Aurora, designed to explore the potential military applications of psychic phenomena. The research had begun in the early 1980s, funded by elements within the KGB who believed that enhanced human consciousness could provide a decisive advantage in intelligence gathering and psychological warfare. The breakthrough had come when Volkov discovered that certain types of radiation, rather than simply damaging human tissue, could actually stimulate dormant neural pathways. Low-level exposure to specific isotopes seemed to enhance empathy, intuition, and pattern recognition. Subjects reported being able to sense the emotional states of others, predict behavioral patterns, and occasionally glimpse events before they occurred. The pendant, according to Volkov's notes, was a focusing device, a crystalline matrix that had been grown inside the reactor core, its atomic structure altered by controlled exposure to radiation. It served as both an amplifier and a stabilizer, allowing subjects to access enhanced abilities without the psychological breakdown that had plagued earlier experiments. Marcus paused in his reading, unconsciously reaching for the pendant again. The crystal pulsed gently against his touch, and he found himself remembering details from the previous day with startling clarity. Not just visual memories, but emotional impressions, the way Eddie Kowalski had felt sad rather than angry when discussing his failed restaurant plans. The undercurrent of loneliness that had radiated from the woman at the gas station. He had always been good at reading people. It was a skill that had kept him alive in Afghanistan, where the ability to distinguish between a friendly civilian and a potential suicide bomber could mean the difference between coming home and coming home in a box. But this was different. This was like seeing the emotional landscape of the world rendered in visible colors. Marcus closed the journal and picked up his phone, staring at Jennifer's number. They hadn't spoken since her text about Sarah's school play, and that conversation had been strained and formal, loaded with the weight of everything they couldn't say to each other. But today, something felt different. The walls he had built around himself seemed more permeable, less necessary. He dialed before he could change his mind. "Marcus?" Jennifer's voice carried surprise and a note of caution. "Is everything okay?" "I'm fine," he said, and realized it was true. "I was thinking about Sarah's play. You said it's Thursday?" "Yes, at 7. It's a fall production. They're doing scenes from different plays. Sarah has a monologue from our town." Marcus smiled, remembering how much their daughter had always loved performing. Even as a little girl, she had put on elaborate shows for him and Jennifer, using their living room as a stage and their couch cushions as props. "I'd like to be there," he said, "if that's okay with you." The silence stretched long enough that Marcus began to worry he had overstepped some boundary, violated some unspoken rule of their carefully maintained distance. But when Jennifer spoke again, her voice was softer. "She'd like that," she said. "She misses you, Marcus, more than she lets on." "I miss her too. I miss both of you." "I know," Jennifer said, and for a moment, the years of hurt and disappointment seemed to recede, leaving only the memory of what they had once shared. "You sound different today." "Better, somehow." Marcus touched the pendant through his shirt, feeling its gentle pulse. "I think I'm starting to remember who I used to be. Or maybe figuring out who I'm supposed to become." After they hung up, Marcus returned to the rail yard. The morning mist had burned off, and the autumn sun painted everything in shades of gold and amber. Eddie's trailer was still dark, but Marcus noticed a figure moving among the rolling stock. An older man with silver hair and coveralls that looked like they had seen decades of honest work. The man looked up as Marcus approached, his weathered face creasing into what might have been a smile. He was lean and wiry, with hands that bore the permanent stains of a lifetime spent working with machinery. But his eyes were sharp and alert, holding an intelligence that seemed at odds with his humble appearance. "You must be the fellow who bought the Soviet car," the man said, extending a hand that felt like leather and steel. "Pete Kowalski. Eddie's my nephew." "Marcus Sullivan. Pleased to meet you." Pete studied him for a moment, his gaze lingering on Marcus's face, as if reading something written there in invisible ink. "Eddie mentioned you were military. Afghanistan? 3 tours." Marcus found himself relaxing in Pete's presence. There was something about the older man that felt safe, trustworthy, in a way that reminded him of his own grandfather. "Thank you for your service," Pete said, and unlike most civilians who offered those words, he seemed to mean them. "Nasty business over there. Takes a toll on a man." They walked together toward the Soviet train car, Pete's pace unhurried but purposeful. Marcus noticed that the older man seemed to know exactly where they were going, despite not having been told which car Marcus had purchased. "Mind if I ask what you plan to do with her?" Pete asked as they approached a massive freight car. "Honestly, I'm not sure anymore. I thought I'd scrap it for the metal, but now..." Marcus trailed off, unsure how to explain the changes he was experiencing. Pete nodded as if this made perfect sense. Sometimes we think we're buying one thing and end up with something else entirely. The universe has a sense of humor that way. They reached the train car, and Marcus unlocked the personnel door. As it swung open, he noticed Pete's reaction, a subtle tension in his shoulders. a sharpening of attention that suggested this wasn't the old man's first encounter with whatever lay inside. "You've been in here before," Marcus said. It wasn't a question. Pete was quiet for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the darkness beyond the open door. "A long time ago," he finally said. "Back when she first arrived. Eddie asked me to help him figure out what to do with the contents. And I told him to leave well enough alone. Some things aren't meant to be disturbed." Pete looked at Marcus directly, his eyes holding depths of knowledge and something that might have been regret. "But maybe the time for leaving things alone has passed. Maybe you're the one who's supposed to disturb them." Marcus felt the pendant pulse against his chest, as if responding to Pete's words. "What do you know about what's in there?" "More than I should," Pete said. "Less than I need to." He gestured toward the open door. "Why don't you show me what you found, and I'll tell you what I can." As they stepped into the train car together, Marcus had the distinct impression that this meeting wasn't a coincidence. Like everything else that had happened since he'd first seen the Craigslist ad, it felt orchestrated, as if forces beyond his understanding were moving pieces on a board he was only beginning to perceive. Inside the train car, Pete moved with the familiarity of someone who had spent considerable time in the space. His eyes swept over the shelves of artifacts with recognition rather than wonder, and when Marcus showed him the collection of radiation badges, the older man's face grew solemn. The badges were small metal discs, each one bearing a photograph and Cyrillic text that identified the wearer. Some showed young men with optimistic smiles. Others depicted middle-aged technicians with the serious expressions of people who understood the gravity of their work. All had been exposed to lethal levels of radiation in the final hours of the Chernobyl disaster. "These belong to the liquidators," Pete said quietly, holding one of the badges up to the light. "The men who stayed behind to contain the damage after the explosion. Most of them knew they wouldn't survive, but they did their jobs anyway." Marcus examined the badge in Pete's hand. The photograph showed a man who couldn't have been older than 25, with dark hair and eyes that held a mixture of determination and fear. The name beneath read Viktor Petrov, and the dates indicated he had died 3 days after the reactor explosion. "How do you know all this?" Marcus asked. Pete was quiet for a long moment, his weathered fingers tracing the edge of Victor's badge. "My brother was there," he finally said. "Not as a liquidator, but as an observer. The Americans sent a small team to assess the situation, see if we could provide assistance. Official channels, all very diplomatic. Dmitri was a nuclear engineer before he emigrated to the States. He spoke the language, understood the technology. Was radiation poisoning. Took 6 months to kill him, but it was thorough." Pete's voice remained steady, but Marcus could sense the old grief beneath the words, a pain that had been carried for decades. "He told me things before he died, things that weren't in any official reports." Pete moved to another shelf and picked up a small device that looked like a cross between a radio and a medical monitor. The Soviets weren't just trying to contain a reactor meltdown. They were trying to contain something else, something that the radiation had released or awakened. Dmitri said the energy readings were impossible, that physics, as we understood, it couldn't explain what they were measuring. Marcus felt the pendant pulse against his chest, its rhythm syncing with something deeper than his heartbeat. As Pete spoke, images began to flash through his mind, not memories, but impressions, as if the radiation badges were somehow transmitting the experiences of their former owners. He saw Viktor Petrov climbing the stairs of the reactor building, his dosimeter clicking frantically as he approached the exposed core. The young man's thoughts were clear despite the chaos around him. He was thinking about his wife, about the child she carried, about the future he was sacrificing to prevent an even greater catastrophe. Another flash brought him into the mind of Anatoly Kozlov, a shift supervisor who had stayed at his post even as his colleagues fled. Anatoly was calculating pressure readings and coolant flows. His engineer's mind focused on solutions, even as radiation sickness began to claim his body. The visions came faster now, a cascade of final moments and desperate heroism. Marcus experienced the liquidators' fear, their determination, their love for the families they would never see again. But beneath those human emotions, he sensed something else, a presence that seemed to be watching, learning, growing stronger with each sacrifice. "There, still here," Marcus whispered, holding Victor's badge. Pete nodded slowly. Dmitri said the same thing. That death wasn't an ending in that place, that the radiation had somehow preserved consciousness, turned the exclusion zone into a kind of purgatory where souls couldn't find rest. Marcus set the badge down carefully, as if it were made of glass. "And these artifacts, they're connected to that place?" Dr. Volkov believed that consciousness could survive death under the right conditions, Pete said. That's what his experiments were really about, not creating super soldiers, but proving that human awareness could transcend physical limitations. The reactor explosion gave him the ultimate test case. They spent the next hour examining the contents of the train car, with Pete providing context for items that would have remained mysterious to Marcus. A collection of crystalline formations turned out to be communication devices, grown in the reactor's radiation field and capable of transmitting thoughts across vast distances. A series of metal cylinders contained atmospheric samples from different areas of the exclusion zone, each one preserving a specific moment in time. But it was the personal effects that affected Marcus most deeply. Letters written but never sent. Photographs of families that would never be reunited. Small mementos that spoke of interrupted lives and unfinished business. As he handled each item, the pendants seemed to resonate with their emotional history, allowing him to experience fragments of memory and feeling that belonged to people long dead. Thursday evening arrived with the crisp promise of winter. And Marcus found himself in the auditorium of Sarah's high school, surrounded by proud parents and restless siblings. He had arrived early, wanting to choose a seat where Sarah would be able to see him clearly. The pendant hung beneath his dress shirt, its gentle warmth a source of comfort in the crowded space. Jennifer appeared a few minutes before the curtain, looking surprised to see him actually there. She had dressed carefully for the occasion, a blue dress that Marcus remembered buying for her birthday years ago, back when they still celebrated such things together. "She'd be so happy you came," Jennifer said, settling into the seat beside him. For a moment, they sat in the comfortable silence of two people who had shared a life together, watching other families arrange themselves in the auditorium. When Sarah appeared on stage for her monologue from Our Town, Marcus felt his breath catch. She had grown so much in the months since he'd last seen her, taller, more poised, carrying herself with the kind of confidence that spoke of a young woman discovering her own strength. She wore a simple white dress and spoke Emily Webb's words about the preciousness of ordinary moments with a maturity that belied her 14 years. As she performed, Marcus found himself experiencing not just his own emotions, but Sarah's as well. Through the pendant's influence, he could sense her nervousness transforming into joy as she found her rhythm on stage. He felt her awareness of his presence in the audience, the way her confidence grew knowing that both her parents were there to support her. But there was something else, something that made Marcus sit forward in his seat with sudden concern. Sarah's natural empathy, always strong, seemed enhanced tonight. She wasn't just performing Emily's emotions, she was channeling them, experiencing the character's grief and wonder as if they were her own. The pendant grew warm against Marcus's chest, pulsing in rhythm with his daughter's heartbeat 50 feet away. Somehow, impossibly, the artifacts were affecting her too. After the performance, they met Sarah in the lobby, where she threw herself into Marcus's arms with the unself-conscious enthusiasm of a child, temporarily forgetting the careful distance she had maintained during their recent interactions. "You came," she said, and Marcus could hear years of disappointment and hope tangled together in those two words. "I wouldn't have missed it," he replied, meaning it completely. "You were wonderful up there. Really wonderful." As they talked, Marcus became increasingly aware of Sarah's enhanced emotional sensitivity. She seemed to pick up on the feelings of everyone around them, her relief at his presence, Jennifer's cautious optimism, even the various moods of other families celebrating in the lobby. It was subtle, but unmistakable to someone who was experiencing the same phenomenon. The pendant had found a new bearer, and Marcus realized that whatever forces had drawn him to the train car were far from finished with his family. The containment vessel fragment arrived at Marcus's awareness like a whisper that gradually became a scream. He had been methodically cataloging the train car's contents when he discovered it, hidden beneath a lead-line container at the very back of the car. The moment his fingers brushed the metal surface, the world exploded into chaos. April 26, 1986, 1:23 a.m. Marcus found himself standing in the control room of Reactor 4, surrounded by technicians whose faces showed a mixture of confusion and growing terror. The air tasted of ozone and copper, and every surface seemed to vibrate with barely contained energy. Warning lights flashed in patterns that spoke of systems failing faster than human minds could process. But this vision was different from his earlier glimpses into the past. This time, he wasn't just observing. He was experiencing the event through Dr. Volkov's eyes, feeling the physicist's desperate determination as he raced to implement a plan that might contain the disaster. "The psychic amplifiers are overloading," Volkov shouted over the cacophony of alarms. He held a device that looked like a more primitive version of the pendant Marcus now wore, its crystal core blazing with unstable energy. "If we don't shut down the experiment now, we'll tear a hole in reality itself. The reactor is beyond our control," another scientist replied, his voice hollow with shock. The explosion is a symptom, not the cause," Volkov interrupted. "We opened something that should have remained closed. The enhanced subjects, their consciousness is interfacing directly with the atomic structure of the fuel rods. Their fear, their panic, it's destabilizing matter at the quantum level." Marcus felt Volkov's understanding wash over him like a cold tide. The Chernobyl disaster hadn't been caused by human error or mechanical failure. It had been the result of a psychic feedback loop, consciousness interfacing with atomic forces in ways that violated every known law of physics. The vision shifted, and Marcus found himself in a different part of the facility, watching as Volkov desperately tried to save what he could of his research. The physicist moved with purposeful haste, selecting specific artifacts and sealing them in radiation-proof containers. "If I cannot prevent this catastrophe, at least I can preserve the possibility of redemption," Volkov muttered as he worked. "Someday, someone will understand what we attempted here. Someone will find a way to use this knowledge for healing rather than destruction." As Volkov sealed the final container, a section of the reactor core exploded through the ceiling above. "Damn!" Marcus felt the physicist's body being flooded with lethal radiation. But instead of dying, Volkov seemed to become something else, his consciousness expanding, merging with the psychic field that now permeated the entire facility. "I will wait." Volkov's voice echoed across impossible distances. "I will guide the one who comes after, the one who can finish what I began." The vision ended abruptly, leaving Marcus gasping in the Pennsylvania rail yard, his hands still gripping the containment vessel fragment. But the artifact's influence lingered, showing him glimpses of other moments, flash-forwards to events that hadn't happened yet, possibilities that branched out from this moment, like roads on a map dotting one potential future. He saw himself standing before a crowd of government officials, the artifacts laid out on a table like evidence in a trial. In another, he watched Sarah using abilities that made his own enhanced empathy seem pale by comparison. Her consciousness expanded to encompass entire communities. And in a third, darker vision, he saw men in black suits descending on his apartment, their faces hidden but their intentions clear. Marcus released the fragment and stumbled backward, his heart hammering against his ribs. The pendant around his neck pulsed frantically, as if trying to stabilize the psychic turbulence the larger artifact had unleashed. He needed to get away from this place, needed time to process what he had experienced. But as he moved toward the train car's exit, he noticed that he wasn't alone. A man in a dark sedan sat parked at the rail yard's entrance, making no effort to conceal his presence. As Marcus watched, the man raised a pair of binoculars, studying the train car with professional interest. The surveillance had begun. Over the next few days, Marcus became acutely aware of being watched. The same sedan appeared in different locations around his apartment complex. His phone developed odd echoes and delays that suggested someone was monitoring his calls. Even his internet activity seemed to be tracked. Websites loaded slowly, and some pages failed to load at all. But the enhanced awareness the pendant provided allowed Marcus to sense more than just external surveillance. He could feel the emotional intentions of his watchers. Not malevolent, exactly, but wary and uncertain. They were trying to assess him, to determine whether he posed a threat or represented an opportunity. Sarah's visit to his apartment came as a surprise. She arrived on a Saturday afternoon, claiming she wanted to see how he was living, but Marcus sensed deeper concerns beneath her casual demeanor. His daughter moved through the small space with the careful attention of someone conducting an inspection, her enhanced empathy allowing her to read the emotional history embedded in the walls. "You seem different, Dad," she said, settling onto his second-hand couch. "Mom says you've been more present lately, more like your old self." Marcus studied his daughter's face, noting the way her eyes seemed to focus on things that weren't quite there, as if she was seeing layers of reality that remained invisible to normal perception. The artifact's influence on her was growing stronger. "I've been working through some things," he said carefully, "finding ways to deal with the nightmares, the anxiety. It's a process." Sarah nodded, but her expression suggested she wasn't entirely convinced by his explanation. "I've been having strange dreams lately," she said, "about places I've never been, people I've never met. And sometimes, when I'm around other people, I can feel what they're feeling so strongly, it's like their emotions are my own." The pendant grew warm against Marcus's chest, responding to his spike of concern. Sarah's abilities were developing faster than his own had, perhaps because her mind was younger, more adaptable. But that also meant she was more vulnerable to the psychological dangers that had claimed earlier subjects in Volkov's experiments. "Dreams can be tricky things," Marcus said, trying to keep his voice neutral. "Sometimes our minds process experiences in ways that feel more real than reality." "But what if they are real?" Sarah asked, her eyes meeting his directly. "What if there are things happening in the world that most people can't see or understand?" Before Marcus could respond, his phone buzzed with a text message from Jennifer. "Two men in suits came by asking about you. Said they were from the VA, but something felt off. Call me." Marcus's blood turned to ice. The watchers weren't content to observe anymore. They were moving to the next phase of their investigation. And somehow, they had connected his activities to his family. "I need to go," Sarah said, standing abruptly. Her empathic abilities had picked up on his emotional shift, sensing the danger even if she didn't understand its source. "But Dad, whatever's happening with you, whatever you're dealing with, you don't have to face it alone." After she left, Marcus sat in his empty apartment, the weight of impossible choices pressing down on him like a physical force. The artifacts offered him healing, purpose, and abilities beyond anything he had ever imagined. But they also posed a threat to everything he cared about most. The pendant pulsed against his chest, and for a moment, He could feel Dr. Volkov's presence more clearly than ever before, not as a vision or a memory, but as a living consciousness that existed somewhere between past and present. The choice was never yours to make alone, Volkov's voice whispered in his mind. The artifacts choose their bearers, but they also choose their moment. The time for hiding is over, Marcus. The time for action has begun. The modified Soviet radio revealed itself to Marcus 3 days later, hidden beneath what appeared to be a false bottom in one of the train car's storage compartments. Unlike the other artifacts, this device seemed to be waiting for him, its vacuum tubes glowing faintly with an inner light that had nothing to do with electrical current. The moment Marcus touched the radio's controls, static filled the air, not the random noise of electromagnetic interference, but patterns that suggested intelligence, purpose, communication across impossible distances. As he adjusted the frequency dial, the static resolved into something that might have been a voice, speaking in heavily accented English. Finally, the voice said, carrying relief that spanned decades. I was beginning to think you would never find it. Marcus's hands trembled as he recognized the speaker. Dr. Volkov? In a manner of speaking, yes. Though I exist now in ways that defy conventional understanding of life and death. The physicist's voice carried across what felt like vast distances, filtered through layers of reality that bent normal concepts of space and time. The explosion at Reactor 4 created what you might call a temporal loop, a pocket of existence, where consciousness can persist indefinitely, but always anchored to that moment of catastrophe. Marcus leaned closer to the radio, his voice barely above a whisper. How is this possible? The psychic amplifiers we developed weren't just tools for enhancing human perception, Volkov explained. They were windows into the fundamental structure of reality itself. When the reactor exploded, the massive release of energy combined with the amplified consciousness of our test subjects to create something unprecedented, a stable bridge between dimensions of existence. The radio crackled, and for a moment, Marcus could see through Volkov's eyes the control room as it existed in that eternal moment of disaster, frozen in time but alive with possibilities. Other figures moved through the space, the consciousness of those who had died in the explosion, their awareness preserved in the psychic field that permeated the facility. We learned too late that consciousness and atomic structure are more closely connected than anyone imagined. Volkov continued. Fear, anger, desperation. These emotions can literally alter the stability of matter at the quantum level. That's what caused the explosion. Our subjects were experiencing such intense psychic enhancement that their emotional states began to interfere with the nuclear processes in the reactor core. Marcus felt the implications of this revelation wash over him like a cold tide. You're saying that thoughts can affect physical reality? Not just thoughts, consciousness itself, when properly amplified and focused. The artifacts you've discovered are tools for achieving that amplification safely, without the catastrophic feedback loops that destroyed Reactor 4. As they spoke, Marcus became aware of other voices in the background, not audible through the radio, but sensed through the pendant's influence. The consciousness of other project members, their awareness somehow preserved in the same temporal loop that held Volkov. They were working together, he realized, using their collective knowledge to guide him towards some greater purpose. There are others like you, Volkov said, answering Marcus's unspoken question. Throughout the world, artifacts from our research have found their way to individuals capable of using them responsibly. Most don't realize the true nature of what they've discovered, but a few like you are beginning to understand. What happened to the other artifacts? Marcus asked. Scattered, hidden, protected by those who understood their potential for both creation and destruction. Some were taken by government agencies. Others found their way into private collections. A few were deliberately lost, buried so deep that finding them would require the kind of desperation that drove you to purchase that train car. The radio's signal flickered, and Volkov's voice became more urgent. But there are those who seek to gather the artifacts for darker purposes. The same military-industrial complex that corrupted our original research still exists, though it operates under different names now. They believe the artifacts can be weaponized, turned into tools for controlling human consciousness on a global scale. Marcus felt his blood turn cold. Who are they? A consortium of defense contractors, government black projects, and private entities that profit from human conflict. They call themselves the Prometheus Group, and they've been tracking artifact-related phenomena for decades. Your recent activities have attracted their attention. As if summoned by their conversation, Marcus's phone buzzed with an incoming call. The number was blocked, but when he answered, a crisp, professional voice filled the silence. Mr. Sullivan? This is Agent Carter with the Department of Energy. We need to schedule a meeting to discuss some materials that may have come into your possession, materials that pose a significant risk to public safety. Marcus looked at the radio, where Volkov's voice had fallen silent. The physicist was listening, he realized, monitoring the call through the psychic connection the artifacts provided. I'm not sure what you're referring to, Marcus said carefully. I think you do, Mr. Sullivan. We're prepared to offer you substantial compensation for your cooperation, as well as guarantees regarding your family's safety. But this is a limited-time offer. I'll be in touch within 24 hours to arrange the details. The line went dead, leaving Marcus staring at his phone with a mixture of fear and anger. They had mentioned his family directly, not a subtle threat, but a clear indication that Sarah and Jennifer were now part of whatever game was being played. They move quickly once they've identified a target. Volkov's voice returned to the radio. The Prometheus Group has resources that span multiple government agencies and private organizations. They won't simply take no for an answer. What do they want exactly? Complete control of the artifacts and everyone who has been affected by them. They believe that psychic enhancement represents the next stage of human evolution, and they intend to be the ones who control that evolution. Marcus thought about Sarah's developing abilities, the way her empathy was growing stronger each day. If these people got their hands on her, there is another way, Volkov said, interrupting his dark thoughts. The artifacts were designed to work together, to create a network of enhanced individuals who could use their abilities for healing rather than control. But it requires trust, cooperation, and most importantly, a willingness to accept responsibility for power that most people can't even imagine. What are you asking me to do? Gather the other bearers. Find those who have been chosen by the artifacts, and bring them together. Only by combining our consciousness can we hope to stand against the forces that seek to exploit what we've discovered. The radio fell silent, leaving Marcus alone with the weight of impossible choices. Outside, he could see the sedan that had been watching him, its occupants no longer making any effort at concealment. Time was running out, and the decisions he made in the next few hours would determine not just his own fate, but the future of human consciousness itself. He thought about Sarah, about the look in her eyes when she told him about her strange dreams and enhanced empathy. She was already part of this, whether he wanted her to be or not. The only question now was whether he would guide her development, or leave her vulnerable to those who would exploit her gifts. Marcus picked up the radio again, adjusting the frequency until Volkov's voice returned. "Tell me what I need to do," he said, and felt the weight of destiny settle around him like a familiar uniform. The identity documents Marcus discovered hidden in Pete's toolbox turned his understanding of everything upside down. He had returned to the rail yard that evening, seeking Pete's counsel about the Prometheus Group's threats, only to find the older man's workspace in disarray. Tools scattered across the floor, papers strewn about, and beneath a overturned workbench, a leather portfolio containing documents that should never have existed. The Soviet-era passport bore Pete's photograph, but the name read Dmitry Kozlov, and the occupation was listed as Special Attach, Committee for State Security, the KGB. Additional documents revealed assignments spanning 3 decades, from nuclear facilities in Siberia to covert operations in Western Europe. But it was the final document that made Marcus's blood run cold. A mission briefing dated 1986, authorizing Agent Kozlov to oversee the evacuation of sensitive materials from the Chernobyl exclusion zone. Pete Dmitry had been lying about everything. "I was wondering when you'd find those," a voice said behind him. Marcus spun around to see Pete standing in the doorway of the workshop, but his posture was different now, more erect, carrying the bearing of a man accustomed to command. The folksy American accent was gone, replaced by crisp English tinged with Russian inflection. "Agent Dmitry Kozlov," Marcus said, his military training automatically assessing threats and escape routes. "I suppose Petrov was your brother's real name?" "No, that much was true. Viktor Petrov was my younger brother." Dmitry's weathered face showed genuine sorrow. "He died, as I told you, radiation poisoning from his time in the exclusion zone. But he wasn't there as a liquidator. He was part of my extraction team." Marcus kept his hand near the pendant, drawing strength from its steady pulse. Extraction of what? Dr. Volkov's research, primarily, but also something far more important, Volkov himself. Dmitry moved slowly into the workshop, his hands visible and empty. The physicist wasn't killed in the explosion, Marcus. The psychic amplifiers he had developed allowed his consciousness to survive the destruction of his physical form. My mission was to contain that consciousness and transport it somewhere safe. The train car was designed as a mobile containment facility, yes. We loaded it with everything we could salvage from Project Aurora artifacts, research notes, and most importantly, the crystalline matrix that held Volkov's preserved awareness. Then, we sealed it and transported it out of the Soviet Union as part of a legitimate scrap metal transaction. Marcus felt the pendant grow warm against his chest, and suddenly he could sense Volkov's presence more clearly than ever before. The physicist's consciousness wasn't just communicating through the radio, it was embedded in every artifact in the train car, distributed across the entire collection like data stored on multiple drives. "Why bring it here?" Marcus asked. "Why hide it in an American rail yard?" Dmitry's expression grew complex, mixing professional duty with personal conviction. "Because by 1989, it became clear that my government intended to weaponize Volkov's discoveries. The same officials who had caused the disaster through their demands for military applications were now planning to extract the preserved consciousness and force it to develop even more dangerous technologies. So you defected." "I chose preservation over exploitation," Dmitry corrected. "Volkov's consciousness had shown me glimpses of what his research could accomplish if used for healing rather than destruction. Enhanced empathy could eliminate warfare. Accelerated pattern recognition could solve climate change. Expanded awareness could guide humanity toward unprecedented cooperation and growth." Marcus thought about his own experiences with the artifacts, the way they had healed his PTSD, improved his relationship with his family, and opened his perception to emotional realities he had never imagined. But he also thought about Sarah's rapid development and the frightening possibilities if such power fell into the wrong hands. "The listing," Marcus said, understanding flooding through him. "The Craigslist ad for the train car. You placed it." "I've been waiting 30 years for the right person to find it," Dmitry confirmed. "Someone with the psychological resilience to handle the artifact's influence, the moral clarity to use them responsibly, and the desperation necessary to take the risks required. You've been watching me. Monitoring, yes. Your military record, your struggles with PTSD, your family situation, everything suggested you were an ideal candidate." But the final choice had to be yours. The artifacts themselves had to accept. You. Marcus felt a surge of anger at the manipulation, but it was tempered by understanding. Dmitri had been protecting Volkov's legacy for decades, waiting for someone capable of continuing the work. In his place, Marcus might have made similar choices. What about the Prometheus group? Marcus asked. How long have they known about the artifacts? They've been tracking anomalous phenomena for decades, but your recent activities triggered automated monitoring systems. The enhanced electromagnetic signatures, the psychological changes in yourself and your daughter. These things leave traces that the right technology can detect. Sarah. Marcus felt fear spike through him. How much do they know about her? Enough to consider her a high-priority target. Children who develop psychic abilities naturally are exponentially more valuable than adults who require artifact enhancement. They represent the next generation of human evolution. Dmitri reached into his jacket and withdrew a thick folder filled with photographs and technical documents. Agent Carter isn't working for the Department of Energy, Marcus. He's employed by Meridian Technologies, a private defense contractor that serves as the Prometheus Group's primary research arm. They've been developing countermeasures to psychic enhancement for years, preparing for the day when they could capture and study artifact bearers. The photographs showed a facility that looked more like a prison than a research laboratory, underground levels with reinforced cells. monitoring equipment designed to measure brain activity, and what appeared to be experimental chambers where human subjects could be isolated and studied. They've done this before, Marcus realized. 17 confirmed cases over the past decade. Individuals who discovered artifacts or developed spontaneous psychic abilities were identified, captured, and subjected to extensive experimentation. Most didn't survive the process. Marcus studied the photographs with growing horror. One showed a young woman, barely older than Sarah, connected to a complex array of monitoring devices. Her eyes held a haunted quality that spoke of prolonged suffering, and according to the attached notes, she had died during an attempt to artificially amplify her telepathic abilities. Why are you telling me this now? Marcus asked. Because the artifacts have begun to resonate together more strongly since you started working with them. Volkov's consciousness is growing more active, and the psychic field around the train car is expanding. The Prometheus Group sensors are detecting massive energy spikes centered on this location. As if summoned by their conversation, Marcus's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Final offer, Mr. Sullivan. Tomorrow at noon. Meridian Technologies facility, Route 15. Come alone and bring everything. Your family's safety depends on your cooperation. They have Jennifer and Sarah, Marcus said, his voice hollow with fear. Not yet, Dmitri replied. But they've positioned assets near both your ex-wife's home and your daughter's school. One word from Carter, and they'll be taken into protective custody for their own safety. Marcus felt the pendant pulse frantically against his chest, responding to his emotional turmoil. Through its influence, he could sense Volkov's consciousness becoming more agitated. The physicist's preserved awareness reacting to the threat against the people Marcus loved most. There's another way, Dmitri said quietly. But it requires accepting the full scope of what Volkov's research made possible. The artifacts weren't just designed to enhance individual consciousness. They were meant to create a collective awareness, a network of minds working in perfect harmony. What are you suggesting? That we stop hiding and start fighting? That we gather every artifact bearer we can find and show the Prometheus Group what enhanced human consciousness is truly capable of? Dmitri's eyes held depths of determination that reminded Marcus of his own resolve during the worst moments in Afghanistan. Volkov spent 30 years in that temporal loop, planning for this moment. He knows how to defeat them. Marcus looked out the workshop window. where shadows moved between the abandoned rail cars. The watchers were closing in, time was running out, and the choices he made in the next few hours would determine whether humanity's next evolutionary step led to liberation or enslavement. The pendant pulsed once more, and in that pulse Marcus felt not just Volkov's presence, but the consciousness of every person who had died at Chernobyl, their sacrifice demanding that their legacy be used for healing rather than harm. "Tell me the plan," Marcus said, and felt destiny shift around him like pieces on a cosmic chessboard. The master key revealed itself too. Marcus, as he and Dmitri prepared the train car for what might be their final stand. Hidden beneath a steel plate in the floor, the crystalline device was unlike anything else in the collection, a perfect fusion of Soviet engineering and physics that bordered on the supernatural. The moment Marcus touched it, every artifact in the car began to resonate in harmony, their individual purposes unifying into something far greater than the sum of their parts. Volkov's ultimate failsafe, Dmitri explained as they worked to arrange the artifacts in a specific pattern around the train car's interior. He designed it during the final days before the reactor explosion, when he realized that his research would either heal the world or destroy it. There was no middle ground. The key was warm in Marcus's hand, pulsing with energy that seemed to synchronize with his heartbeat. Through its influence, he could sense the consciousness of every artifact bearer around the world, dozens of individuals who had unknowingly become part of Volkov's network, their enhanced awareness creating invisible threads of connection that spanned continents. "What happens when I activate it?" Marcus asked, studying the crystalline device's complex internal structure. "Two possibilities," Dmitri replied, his weathered hands moving with practiced precision as he calibrated the communication radio. "Either the artifacts integrate their consciousness-enhancing effects into a stable network, creating the collective awareness Volkov envisioned, or the psychic feedback destroys every enhanced individual on the planet." Marcus felt his blood run cold, including Sarah, including everyone whose consciousness has been altered by contact with the artifacts. The energy release would be instantaneous, affecting every bearer simultaneously, regardless of distance. Through the radio static, Volkov's voice emerged with unusual clarity, as if the physicist's preserved consciousness was drawing strength from the master key's proximity. "The choice was never meant to be easy, Marcus. But consider the alternative: allow the Prometheus group to capture and weaponize the artifacts, turning humanity's greatest evolutionary leap into a tool for permanent enslavement." Marcus thought about the photographs Dmitri had shown him, the evidence of systematic torture and experimentation conducted in the name of scientific progress. How many others like Sarah would suffer if the consortium succeeded in their goals? "There's something else you should know," Dmitri said, pausing in his preparations. "The terminal illness I mentioned, it's not radiation poisoning from decades of exposure. It's psychic overload. I've been using a modified artifact to maintain contact with other bearers around the world, coordinating our efforts to stay ahead of the Prometheus group. But the strain is killing me." He rolled up his sleeve, revealing skin that looked almost translucent, veins visible beneath the surface like a roadmap of failing circulation. "I have perhaps days left, maybe hours if we push the network to its limits. But if we succeed tonight, if we can create the stable collective consciousness Volkov envisioned, my sacrifice will ensure that no one else has to suffer the same fate." Marcus felt the weight of responsibility settle around him like armor, not just for his own family, but for every enhanced individual around the world, every person whose life would be affected by the choices made in this forgotten rail yard. His phone rang, cutting through the tension like a blade. Agent Carter's voice was crisp and professional, but Marcus could hear underlying tension that suggested the Prometheus group was facing pressures of their own. "Mr. Sullivan, I trust you've had time to consider our offer. I should mention that, We've taken the liberty of establishing protective surveillance around your family members. For their safety, of course. Where are they? Marcus demanded. Safe, comfortable, and completely unaware of any danger. But their continued well-being depends on your cooperation. We need those artifacts, Mr. Sullivan, and we need them tonight. Marcus looked at Dmitri, who nodded grimly. Through the artifact's enhanced awareness, he could sense the truth. Jennifer and Sarah were indeed under surveillance, but they hadn't been taken yet. The Prometheus group was still hoping to acquire the artifacts through negotiation rather than force. I'll bring what you want, Marcus said. But I want to see my family first. Confirmation that they're safe. That can be arranged. The Meridian. Facility on Route 15, midnight. Come alone and bring everything. After Carter hung up, Marcus and Dmitri continued their preparations with renewed urgency. The artifacts had to be arranged in a specific pattern, one that would channel their collective energy through the master key while preventing the kind of catastrophic feedback that had destroyed Reactor 4. The consciousness of the Chernobyl victims will help stabilize the process. Volkov's voice explained through the radio. Their sacrifice created a buffer against psychic overload, a foundation upon which the network can safely build. As they worked, Marcus became increasingly aware of Sarah's presence in his mind. The artifact's influence had created a permanent connection between them, and he could sense her confusion and growing fear as she felt the psychic turbulence building. Around the rail yard. She knows something's wrong, Marcus said, pausing in his calibration of the shield generator. Enhanced individuals always sense major disturbances in the psychic field, Dmitri replied. It's one of the first signs of development. Your daughters' abilities are advancing rapidly faster than any case I've documented. Through his connection with Sarah, Marcus could feel her trying to reach out to him, her young mind struggling to understand the forces that were reshaping her perception of reality. He sent back what comfort he could, a pulse of paternal love and protection that seemed to calm her slightly. The other bearers are responding to the preparation phase, Dmitri reported, monitoring readings from a device that looked like a cross between a seismograph and an EKG machine. Enhanced individuals in 12 countries are reporting unusual dreams, spontaneous visions, and electromagnetic anomalies in their vicinity. Are they in danger? Only if we fail. The Prometheus group has monitoring stations worldwide, but they lack the technology to track individual bearers unless those individuals actively use their abilities. Tonight's operation will change that. Every enhanced person on Earth will become visible to their sensors. Marcus studied the master key, its crystalline structure seeming to contain entire galaxies of light. Volkov, if this works, if we create the collective consciousness you envisioned, what happens to our individual identities? Enhanced, not erased, the physicist replied. Think of it as joining a symphony rather than disappearing into noise. Each consciousness retains its unique perspective while contributing to a greater harmony. The result is exponentially greater wisdom, empathy, and problem-solving capability than any individual could achieve alone. And if it doesn't work? Volkov was quiet for a long moment before answering. Then humanity loses its greatest opportunity for evolution, and the artifact's power becomes a weapon in the hands of those who would use fear to control the future. As midnight approached, Marcus felt the weight of impossible choices pressing down on him. In one hand, he held the master key, the tool that could unite human consciousness in unprecedented cooperation or destroy everyone whose awareness had been touched by the artifacts. In the other, he carried the hope of seeing his family safe, even if it meant surrendering the tools that could reshape the world. There's still time to run, Dmitri said quietly. Take Sarah and Jennifer. Disappear somewhere the Prometheus group can't find you. Live quiet lives and hope the artifact's influence fades over time. Marcus thought about that possibility abandoning the train car and its contents, walking away from Volkov's vision and the consciousness of those who had died at Chernobyl. It would be the safe choice, the reasonable choice, the choice any responsible father would make. But as he held the master key, feeling its pulse synchronize with his heartbeat, and Sarah's, and the distant awareness of artifact bearers around the world, Marcus realized that some choices transcended personal safety. Some moments demanded that individuals risk everything for the possibility of something greater. "Volkov," he said into the radio, "tell me exactly how to activate the network." The physicist's voice carried across decades of preserved hope and sacrifice. "Place the master key at the center of the artifact array, and focus your consciousness on connection rather than separation. Think not of what you might lose, but of what humanity might gain. The artifacts will do the rest." Marcus looked out at the Pennsylvania countryside, where the lights of the Meridian facility glowed like a malevolent star on the horizon. In a few hours, he would either help birth a new phase of human evolution or watch everything he cared about disappear into the darkness of a world where consciousness itself had become a commodity to be bought and sold. The pendant pulsed against his chest, and in that pulse, Marcus felt the presence of everyone who had ever made a sacrifice for the possibility of a better future. Soldiers who had died for ideals they never lived to see realized. Scientists who had given their lives for discoveries that would benefit generations yet unborn. Parents who had chosen their children's welfare over their own safety. Tonight, he would join their ranks, and the choice no longer felt like a burden but like a privilege. "Let's finish what we started," Marcus said, and began the final preparations for humanity's next evolutionary leap. The Meridian Technologies facility rose from the Pennsylvania landscape like a modernist fortress, its clean lines and reflective surfaces designed to project corporate efficiency while concealing darker purposes. Marcus approached the main entrance at precisely midnight, the master key concealed in his jacket pocket and the pendant pulsing steadily against his chest. Agent Carter waited in the lobby, flanked by two security personnel whose bearing suggested military backgrounds. Behind them, through reinforced glass doors, Marcus could see the sterile corridors of what appeared to be a research facility, though the electromagnetic shielding built into the walls suggested purposes that went far beyond conventional science. "Mr. Sullivan," Carter said, extending a hand that Marcus ignored, "I'm pleased you decided to be reasonable about this situation." "I want to see my family first," Marcus said, his enhanced awareness immediately picking up the emotional undercurrents in the room. Carter radiated professional satisfaction, tinged with anticipation, while the security guards projected a mixture of boredom and readiness for violence. "Of course, they're in our comfortable waiting area, completely unharmed and unaware of the true nature of tonight's proceedings." Carter led him through a maze of corridors lined with laboratories and monitoring stations. Through observation windows, Marcus caught glimpses of equipment he recognized from Dimitri's photographs: brain activity scanners, electromagnetic field generators, and isolation chambers designed to contain and study enhanced individuals. They stopped at a viewing room where Marcus could see Jennifer and Sarah sitting in what appeared to be a pleasant lounge area, drinking coffee and watching television. His ex-wife looked confused but not frightened, while Sarah kept glancing around with the heightened awareness of someone whose psychic sensitivity was picking up unusual energy signatures. "As you can see, they're perfectly safe," Carter said. "Your cooperation will ensure they remain that way." Marcus studied his daughter through the reinforced glass, noting the way she periodically touched her temple as if experiencing mild headaches. The facility's electromagnetic shielding was interfering with her developing abilities, creating a psychic static that caused her discomfort. "The artifacts," Carter continued. "I trust you brought everything from the train car?" Marcus reached into his jacket, his fingers closing around the master key. Most of them. But there's something you should understand about Dr. Volkov's research. The artifacts aren't just tools. They're components of a larger system, one that requires specific knowledge to operate safely. Carter's eyes sharpened with interest. Knowledge that you possess? Knowledge that I've acquired, yes. But activating the full network requires more than just flipping a switch. Marcus pulled out the master key, watching as the crystalline device immediately began to glow in response to the facility's concentrated electromagnetic fields. The reaction was immediate and violent. Emergency lights began flashing throughout the building as monitoring equipment detected massive energy spikes. Alarms blared, and Marcus could hear security personnel shouting orders as systems that had never registered such readings struggled to contain the psychic turbulence. "What did you do?" Carter demanded, but his question was answered as the shield generator Marcus had concealed in his other pocket activated in response to the master key's energy output. A bubble of protective force expanded around Marcus, deflecting the tranquilizer darts that Carter's security team immediately fired. The shield wasn't just physical. It created a pocket of psychic clarity that allowed Marcus to think clearly despite the facility's consciousness-dampening countermeasures. Through the radio concealed in his jacket, Dimitri's voice crackled with urgency. "The other facilities are detecting the energy signature. Prometheus Group assets worldwide are mobilizing." Marcus pressed the master key against the pendant, feeling both artifacts resonate together as they began to access the consciousness network that Volkov had spent decades preparing. Suddenly, he wasn't just experiencing his own awareness. He could sense the presence of artifact bearers around the world. Their enhanced consciousness connecting through invisible threads of psychic energy. Dr. Volkov's preserved awareness manifested more clearly than ever before, the physicist's consciousness stepping out of temporal exile to join the growing network. But he wasn't alone. Marcus could feel the presence of others, the consciousness of every person who had died at Chernobyl, their sacrifice finally finding purpose in this moment of convergence. "The countdown has begun," Volkov's voice echoed, not through the radio but directly into Marcus's mind. "The network is stabilizing, drawing power from the collective will of everyone who ever dreamed of human consciousness evolved beyond its current limitations." Carter and his security team were shouting orders, trying to coordinate a response to something they didn't understand. Their weapons were useless against the shield generator, and their electromagnetic countermeasures only served to amplify the artifact's energy output. But Marcus could sense other threats. Approaching strike teams equipped with more sophisticated technology, vehicles converging on the facility from multiple directions, and most ominously, aircraft that carried devices designed specifically to disrupt psychic phenomena. "They've been preparing for this possibility for years," Dimitri's voice warned through the chaos. "Anti-psychic weapons, consciousness scramblers, technology designed to sever the connections between enhanced individuals through the network." Marcus felt the fear and confusion of artifact bearers worldwide as Prometheus Group assets moved to contain them. Some were already being captured, their consciousness forcibly severed from the growing collective as specialized equipment overwhelmed their enhanced awareness. The facility's emergency protocols kicked in, sealing blast doors and activating containment procedures that have been designed to prevent exactly this kind of psychic emergency. Marcus realized that his family was now trapped in the same building where the final battle for human consciousness would be fought. The shield generator pulsed around him, its energy growing stronger as it drew power from the master key and the expanding network of connected minds. But Marcus could feel the strain on the system, the delicate balance between transcendence and catastrophe that Volkov had warned him about. In the distance, he could hear the approaching roar of helicopters and the electronic whine of weapons systems charging to full power. The heart of Chernobyl revealed itself to Marcus as the consciousness network reached critical mass. manifesting not as a physical artifact, but as the concentrated psychic essence of everyone who had died in the disaster. Their collective awareness, preserved for 35 years in Volkov's temporal loop, now poured into the present moment with the force of accumulated sacrifice and hope. Marcus felt his individual consciousness expand beyond anything he had imagined possible. Through the network, he experienced the perspectives of artifact bearers on every continent. A mathematician in Tokyo, whose enhanced pattern recognition was revolutionizing climate modeling. A nurse in Sao Paulo, whose empathic abilities were healing trauma that conventional therapy couldn't touch. A farmer in Kenya, whose intuitive connection to the land was increasing crop yields beyond all expectations. But the Prometheus Group's response was swift and brutal. Through the network, Marcus felt enhanced individuals around the world being overwhelmed by consciousness-scrambling technology. Their connections to the collective severed with surgical precision. Each severed link felt like losing a limb, a piece of humanity's potential being amputated to preserve the status quo. "You're interfering with natural human evolution," Marcus said, his voice carrying the authority of the collective consciousness as Agent Carter approached with a device that hummed with menacing energy. "We're preventing the dissolution of individual identity," Carter replied, raising what appeared to be a consciousness disruptor. "Your network threatens to erase the boundaries between minds, to reduce humanity to a hive mentality where free will becomes impossible." "You're wrong," Marcus said, feeling the presence of Dr. Volkov's consciousness merge more fully with his own. Enhanced awareness doesn't eliminate individuality. It reveals the connections that were always there. The barriers between minds are illusions that breed fear, mistrust, and violence. Through the heart of Chernobyl, Marcus could access the memories and perspectives of the disaster's victims. He experienced Viktor Petrov's final moments not as an observer, but as a participant, feeling the young liquidator's determination to contain the catastrophe, even at the cost of his own life. Anatoly Kozlov's engineering expertise flowed through his awareness, showing him exactly how the psychic feedback had destabilized the reactor's atomic structure. Most importantly, he felt the collective realization that had emerged in those final hours that consciousness and matter were far more intimately connected than anyone had understood. That fear and love could literally reshape reality at the quantum level. The facility shook as explosions rocked the building's exterior. Through the network, Marcus sensed Dmitri conducting a desperate holding action in the rail yard, using the train car's remaining artifacts to amplify the collective consciousness and protect the bearers who were still connected to the network. But Dmitri was dying, his overstressed nervous system finally succumbing to the strain of coordinating psychic energies across continents. Marcus felt the older man's life force dimming, even as his consciousness merged more completely with the network. "The choice is before you." Volkov's preserved awareness spoke through the heart of Chernobyl. "Accept the responsibility of collective consciousness or watch human potential be harvested by those who would reduce enhanced awareness to a commodity." Carter fired the consciousness disruptor, its beam striking Marcus's protective shield with energies designed to sever psychic connections. But instead of disrupting the network, the attack seemed to strengthen it. The heart of Chernobyl absorbed the disruptor's energy, transforming it from a weapon into an amplifier. Through the facility's security cameras, Marcus could see Jennifer and Sarah in their containment area, his daughter pressed against the reinforced glass as her enhanced empathy picked up the psychic battle raging throughout the building. Sarah's abilities were growing exponentially in response to the network's activation, her young mind proving more adaptable to expanded consciousness than any adult brain. The realization hit Marcus like a physical blow. Sarah wasn't just being affected by the network, she was becoming its focal point. Her natural psychic development, enhanced by exposure to the artifacts, was creating a stable foundation around which the collective consciousness could organize itself. "She's the key," Marcus whispered, understanding flooding through him. Not the artifacts, not the network, Sarah, represents the next stage of human evolution. Carter must have reached the same conclusion because he immediately redirected his team toward the containment area where Marcus's family waited. "Secure the girl," he ordered. "She's our primary objective now." But as Carter's security forces moved through the facility's corridors, they encountered something unprecedented. The consciousness of the Chernobyl victims, channeled through the heart of Chernobyl, began to manifest as visible phenomena. Shadows moved with purpose through the building. Equipment malfunctioned in patterns that suggested intelligence, and the facility's own security systems turned against their operators. Marcus felt his connection to the network solidify. The boundaries between his individual awareness and the collective consciousness dissolving into something greater than either could achieve alone. Through Sarah's young mind, he experienced the future that enhanced human consciousness could create a world where empathy guided policy, where pattern recognition solved problems before they became crises, where the connections between all living things became visible and honored. "The network is stabilizing," Volkov announced, his voice now speaking through every connected consciousness simultaneously. "The transition is beginning." As Carter's forces reached the containment area, Marcus made his final choice. Instead of trying to rescue his family through violence, he opened his mind completely to the collective consciousness, allowing the heart of Chernobyl to channel the love and sacrifice of everyone who had ever chosen humanity's future over their own safety. The effect was immediate and transformative. Throughout the facility, enhanced individuals who had been captured began to reconnect to the network. Around the world, consciousness scramblers failed as the collective awareness reached critical mass. And in the containment area, Sarah's eyes began to glow with the same light that had once illuminated the reactor core at Chernobyl. Not the fire of destruction, but the radiance of consciousness finally freed from the limitations that had constrained human potential for millennia. 6 months later, Marcus stood beside the memorial stone that had become the centerpiece of the Chernobyl Remembrance Foundation, watching as visitors from around the world approached the simple granite marker with expressions of wonder and reverence. The stone itself was unremarkable gray Pennsylvania granite, carved with the names of the disaster's victims. But its true significance lay in what it contained: the preserved consciousness of everyone who had sacrificed their lives to prevent a greater catastrophe. The train car sat on a specially constructed siding beside the memorial, no longer hidden in a forgotten rail yard, but displayed as the traveling monument it had always been meant to become. The Cyrillic lettering on its sides had been restored and translated, telling the story of Dr. Volkov's research and the liquidators who had given their lives to contain forces beyond human understanding. Sarah emerged from the train car's interior, where she had been conducting one of her sessions with other enhanced individuals. At 15, she had grown into her abilities with a grace that amazed everyone who worked with her. The frightening intensity of her psychic development had stabilized into something more sustainable, enhanced empathy that allowed her to help others process trauma, pattern recognition that revealed solutions to complex problems, and most remarkably, the ability to help newly enhanced individuals integrate their expanded awareness without the psychological breakdown that had claimed earlier subjects. "The veteran from Seattle is making real progress," she told Marcus as they walked together through the memorial garden. "His PTSD episodes are decreasing, and he's starting to remember who he was before the war changed him." Marcus smiled, thinking about his own transformation. The nightmares that had plagued him for years were gone, replaced by dreams that sometimes showed glimpses of possible futures. Not prophecies, exactly, but intuitive insights into the patterns that shaped human behavior and social development. His relationship with Jennifer had healed to the point where they could work together effectively, even if romantic reconciliation remained beyond reach. Dr. Chung called from the Beijing facility. Sarah continued. They're ready to begin the climate modeling project next month. The Enhanced Pattern Recognition Network has identified intervention points that conventional science missed. The Global Consciousness Network had evolved far beyond what even Dr. Volkov had envisioned. Rather than creating a hive mind that erased individuality, it had become something more like a symphony, thousands of enhanced individuals, contributing their unique perspectives to collective problems while maintaining their personal identities and autonomy. The result was unprecedented cooperation on issues that had previously seemed intractable. Climate change mitigation strategies emerged from the enhanced pattern recognition of dozens of scientists working in perfect coordination. Conflict resolution improved dramatically when negotiators could sense the emotional undercurrents that drove international disputes. Medical research accelerated as enhanced empathy allowed researchers to understand the experiential reality of diseases in ways that purely analytical approaches had missed. Pete's grave lay in a quiet corner of the memorial garden, marked by a simple headstone that identified him by his true name, Dmitry Kozlov, Guardian of the Future. Marcus visited the site daily, not out of grief, but out of gratitude. The old spy's sacrifice had made everything else possible. His willingness to spend 30 years protecting Volkov's legacy, ensuring that human consciousness could evolve rather than be enslaved. Jennifer appeared at Marcus's side, carrying a folder filled with correspondence from families whose loved ones had been helped by the Foundation's work. Their relationship had found a new equilibrium, not the romantic partnership they had once shared, but something deeper and more sustainable. The enhanced empathy that now guided both their lives had revealed the love that had always existed beneath their conflicts, even during the darkest periods of their marriage. The government task force wants to schedule another meeting, she said, though her tone suggested she found the bureaucratic aspects of their work tedious. They're still trying to understand how the consciousness network operates without central control, Marcus chuckled. They want to regulate something that exists primarily in dimensions they can't measure. It's like trying to tax dreams or license intuition. The relationship with various government agencies had stabilized into wary cooperation. The Prometheus Group's more extreme elements had been exposed and disbanded, though Marcus suspected that similar organizations would emerge under different names. The impulse to control and weaponize human potential seemed to be a persistent feature of institutional power. But the consciousness network had grown too, large and too distributed to be contained by any single organization. Enhanced individuals had emerged on every continent, their abilities manifesting in ways that served their local communities while contributing to the global collective. Attempts to suppress or control them had proved futile. Consciousness, once expanded, seemed to resist compression back into its original limitations. Agent Carter had been among those who experienced what the media had dubbed involuntary enhancement. Exposure to the consciousness disruptor's feedback during the Meridian Facility incident had activated dormant psychic pathways in his brain, leaving him with empathic abilities that made his previous career impossible. He now worked as a counselor for other former intelligence operatives, helping them process the psychological damage caused by years of treating human consciousness as just another battlefield. Dr. Volkov's preserved awareness had found peace. At last, his consciousness finally able to rest after decades of vigilant protection. But his research lived on in the work being done at facilities around the world, where enhanced individuals learned to use their abilities responsibly while helping others navigate the transition too. Expanded awareness. The memorial stone pulsed gently as Marcus approached it, responding to his presence with the warm recognition of old friendship. Within its crystalline matrix, the consciousness of the Chernobyl victims continued their eternal vigil, ensuring that the sacrifices made in the service of human evolution would never be forgotten. As the sun set over the Pennsylvania landscape, Painting the sky in shades of amber and gold, Marcus felt the presence of the global consciousness network. Thousands of enhanced minds, working together to solve humanity's greatest challenges while preserving the individual dignity and freedom. That made such cooperation meaningful. The train car's lights came on automatically as darkness approached, illuminating the memorial garden with the gentle glow of artifacts that had transformed from weapons of war into tools of healing. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities for the network to demonstrate its potential for positive change. But tonight, Marcus simply stood with his family beside the memorial to those who had made it all possible, feeling grateful for the broken road that had led him to this moment of quiet triumph. Sometimes, the most important journeys began with losing everything you thought you needed, only to discover that what you'd actually found was everything you'd never known you were searching for in the distance. The consciousness network hummed, with the quiet activity of minds working in harmony, building a future that honored both individual freedom and collective wisdom. The evolution of human consciousness continued, one enhanced awareness at a time, guided by the simple recognition that connection, not separation, was humanity's truest nature.